We like to think we're special, that our civilization is the one that finally sticks. But 700 years ago, a man named Ibn Khaldun sat in a remote castle in Algeria and wrote a book that says, "You are wrong." Who was he? He wasn't just a historian collecting dust in a library. He was a survivor, a politician, a judge, a wanderer, a man who spent his life serving tyrants and fleeing from them. He lived through the Black Death. He watched the plague wipe out his parents, his teachers, half the known world. He saw dynasties in North Africa and Spain rise up, get rich, get lazy, and get slaughtered. He saw the chaos, and he decided to figure out the math behind the madness. So he writes the Muqaddimah. Technically, the title translates to the introduction, but that's deceptive. This isn't a preamble. It's an autopsy of human society. Ibn Khaldun argues that history isn't just a list of battles and kings. He treats it like biology. He says empires are organisms. They have a lifespan. They are born, they grow up, they get old, and they die. No exceptions. He warns that the very things that make an empire great, the unity, the struggle, the hunger, are the exact things that success eventually destroys. He points out that you can't cheat the cycle. You can't buy your way out of it. He looks at the nomadic tribes, the desert toughs, and compares them to the city dwellers drowning in luxury. He sees a pattern, a rhythm. One generation builds, the next maintains, the third destroys. He didn't write this to be poetic. He wrote it because he saw the writing on the wall for his own civilization. He warns us that stability is an illusion. We look at our concrete and steel and think forever. Ibn Khaldun looks at it and sees a sandcastle waiting for the tide. He's not predicting the future with a crystal ball. He's diagnosing us, and the diagnosis is terminal. Ibn Khaldun looks at the timeline of human history, and he doesn't see a straight line of progress. He sees a biological cycle, a clock that starts ticking the moment a society is born. And he is incredibly specific about how much time you get. He argues that the natural lifespan of a dynasty, of any great power, is exactly 3 generations, about 120 years. That's it. He doesn't offer this as a vague metaphor. He treats it like a law of physics. Just as a human body grows, matures, and eventually decays, a civilization must do the same. It cannot escape its own biology. He breaks it down into 3 distinct phases, 3 generations that define the rise and the inevitable ruin. The first generation is the builders, the conquerors. Ibn Khaldun describes these people as tough. They live in what he calls the desert state, even if they aren't literally in the sand. They are rough, unpolished, and used to deprivation. They don't rely on walls or paid armies for protection. They rely on each other. This is where he introduces his most critical concept, Asabiyyah, group solidarity, social glue. In this first generation, the Asabiyyah is ironclad. The ruler is just one of the people. He eats what they eat. He fights where they fight. They are united by necessity. They are hungry. And because they are hungry and united, they are unstoppable. They overthrow the old decaying empire and take its place. But then, time passes. The sons take over. Ibn Khaldun points out that the second generation starts to change. They move from the desert to the city. They inherit the power, but they didn't have to bleed for it, not in the same way. He notes that this is where the shift happens. The ruler begins to separate himself from the tribe. He wants absolute power, not shared leadership. He starts to claim authority for himself, pushing his brothers aside. The Asabiyyah, that tight-knit bond, starts to crack. It's not broken yet, but it's weakening. The people start to get used to luxury. They trade their roughness for comfort. They trade their tents for palaces. They still remember the old ways, the stories of the struggle, but they don't live them anymore. Then comes the third generation, the end of the line. Ibn Khaldun is brutal here. He describes a generation that has completely forgotten the desert. They have never known hunger. They have never known fear. To them, the power and the luxury aren't things to be earned. They're just natural facts of life, like the air they breathe. He warns that in this phase, Asabiyyah is dead. The ruler is no longer a leader of men. He's just a figurehead drowning in excess. The people have lost their edge. They are soft. They are like women and children dependent upon the master. They don't want to fight. They pay mercenaries to do the fighting for them. Taxes skyrocket to pay for the art, the monuments, the endless parties. And the structure rots from the inside. Ibn Khaldun argues that at this point, the civilization is senile. It looks powerful on the outside, maybe more beautiful than ever, but it has no spine. It has no will. It is waiting for a new set of wolves, a new first generation with high asabiyyah and empty stomachs to come over the hill and tear it down. And the cycle starts all over again. You have to understand where this starts, the baseline. For Ibn Khaldun, it begins in the desert. The Bedouin, the nomads. He is obsessed with them, not because he thinks they are noble savages, but because they are alive. He argues that the harshness of the desert creates a specific kind of soul, a martial soul. Think about it. In the wild, there is no standing army to hide behind. You pick up your sword, you defend your own tent. Ibn Khaldun points out that this absolute reliance on the self creates a fortitude that city people simply cannot understand. If you are weak in the desert, you are dead. Simple as that. But then comes the empire, the conquest. The tribe takes the city. They move from the rugged tent to the silk-draped palace, and this is where the rot sets in. Ibn Khaldun warns us that the very moment victory is achieved, the countdown to defeat begins. It is the cruel paradox of power. It softens. It atrophies. He argues that the city dweller becomes like a dependent child. They look to the ruler the way a toddler looks to a father. Save me, protect me. The fierceness that built the empire? Gone. Replaced by a desperate need for tranquility. And it's not just about getting fat or lazy, though that happens too. It is deeper. It is about submission. Ibn Khaldun makes a fascinating point about education and law here. He suggests that being subjected to strict government laws and rigid schooling actually breaks a man's character. It humiliates the soul. The nomad is wild and free. His loyalty is to his blood. The citizen is domestic and tamed. His loyalty is to the system. And tamed animals don't fight off wolves. He explicitly compares the city dweller to a domesticated gazelle, beautiful, well-fed, and completely helpless. Ibn Khaldun identifies this as the point of no return. The defense of the state is outsourced. You are paying strangers to die for you. But money isn't loyalty. Gold isn't blood. He traces this decline through the generations with surgical precision. Generation 1, they remember the desert. They are tough. Generation 2, they hear the stories, but they grew up in luxury. They are softer, but they still have some pride. Generation 3, they are finished. They have never known hunger. They have never known fear. They think the empire is a natural fact, eternal like the mountains. They assume the walls will hold forever. But walls never hold forever. Ibn Khaldun warns that this loss of martial spirit is inevitable. You cannot have the luxury of civilization without losing the savagery required to defend it. It is a trade-off, a transaction, and eventually the bill comes due. A new group comes along, a group with Asabiyyah, a group that is still hungry, still wild, and they look at this soft, wealthy, defended city, and they don't see an empire. They see a meal, and the cycle resets. History moves in a cycle, and Ibn Khaldun tells us that at the very heart of this cycle lies a brutal, uncomfortable truth. Civilization isn't murdered, it commits suicide. But someone has to be there to bury the body. He calls them the Bedouins, the nomads. We might call them the new barbarians. Ibn Khaldun looks at these outsiders, and he doesn't see savages, not really. He sees energy. He sees a raw, terrifying vitality that the civilized world has long forgotten. These are men and women forged in the desert. They live on the edge of starvation. They sleep on hard ground. And because they have nothing, they have each other. This is the core of his argument. He introduces a concept here that changes everything. Asabiyyah, group solidarity, social cohesion, the glue that holds a tribe together when the wind is howling and the wolves are circling. Ibn Khaldun argues that this Asabiyyah is the engine of history. It's not technology, it's not gold, it's the ability of a group to act as one single, unbreakable fist. And the new barbarians, they have it in spades. They have to. In the harshness of the wild, you rely on your brother, or you die. There is no police force to call. There are no walls to hide behind. Ibn Khaldun points out that this constant proximity to death makes them brave. It makes them self-reliant. They carry their own weapons. They fight their own battles. They are biologically the same as the people in the cities, but psychologically, they are a different species. Now, look at the empire they are staring at. Ibn Khaldun turns his gaze to the city, the sedentary culture, the civilized. And what does he see? He sees people who have become comfortable, soft. He warns that luxury acts like a slow-acting poison. When people settle down, when they build high walls and amass great wealth, something breaks inside them. They lose that asabiyyah. They stop relying on each other and start relying on the state. They stop carrying weapons because they have a standing army to do the violence for them. They stop settling disputes with honor and start using courts and bureaucrats. Ibn Khaldun argues that this reliance on the system strips a man of his fortitude. It makes him docile, a sitting duck. So you have this collision course. On one side, you have the empire, rich, bloated, distracted by its own decadence, defending itself with mercenaries who fight for a paycheck, not for loyalty. On the other side, you have the new barbarians, hungry, hardened, bound together by blood and survival, fighting for a future. It's not even a fair fight. And here is the kicker, the part that really stings. Ibn Khaldun suggests that these barbarians are necessary. They are the reboot. They bring a fresh injection of Asabiyyah into a dying system. They clear out the rot. They are the new blood that history demands. But he also leaves us with a haunting realization. These conquerors, these rough men of the desert, they won't stay rough forever. They are walking into the very trap they just destroyed. They will take the city, they will enjoy the silk and the wine, and the clock will start ticking for them too. Ibn Khaldun drops a word on us, asabiyyah. Scholars try to translate it. They say social cohesion, group solidarity, tribalism. But those words are too clean. They're too academic. Ibn Khaldun isn't talking about a club membership. He's talking about a gut feeling. a survival instinct so deep it overrides the fear of death. He argues that this is the engine of history, the literal fuel of empire. And where does he find it? Not in the palaces, not in the universities. He finds it in the mud, in the desert, among the Bedouins, the nomads, people with nothing. He points out something uncomfortable here. He says that hardship, brutal, unforgiving hardship, is the only thing that forges this bond. Think about it. When you live in the desert, there are no city walls to hide behind. There is no police force to call. There is no government safety net. There is only your brother, your cousin, your tribe. If they die, you die. So Ibn Khaldun says a distinctive psychology takes root. The I disappears. The we takes over. This is Asabiyyah. It's the raw, unpolished superpower of the marginalized. He warns us not to romanticize this. It's not about holding hands. It's about defense. It's about looking at a harsh world and saying, we survive together or we don't survive at all. And this gives the tribe an edge, a terrifying edge. Ibn Khaldun analyzes the city dwellers, the civilized folks, us. He looks at us and sees weakness. We rely on laws. We rely on paid soldiers to fight our wars. We rely on walls of stone. We get soft. But the tribe relies on blood. He explains that in the wild, lineage is everything. You know who your father is. You know your great-grandfather. That clarity creates the bond. But in the city, lineage gets muddy. Connections become transactional. I'll help you if you pay me. That's not Asabiyyah. That's business. And business doesn't build empires. It just manages them. He argues that when a tribe with high Asabiyyah clashes with a settled city, the city doesn't stand a chance. It's simple math to him. One group fights for a paycheck, the other fights for their existence. Who do you think wins? Ibn Khaldun traces this trajectory. He shows how this group feeling turns a ragtag group of shepherds into a conquering army. They move as one body. They share a single will. It's almost a force of nature. And he points out that this power, this Asabiyyah, is the only way to establish a state. You can't build a dynasty on paperwork. You need a group of people willing to die for the cause. You need that fanatical, irrational, blood-bound loyalty. But here's the catch. Here is the tragedy he wants us to see. This superpower, it has an expiration date. It's a finite resource. He explains that the very thing that makes the tribe strong, the hardship, the desert life, the reliance on each other, is exactly what they are trying to escape. They use their Asabiyyah to conquer the city, to get the luxury, to get the safety. They want to stop suffering. But the moment they succeed, the moment they swap the tent for the palace, the clock starts ticking. He suggests that the seeds of their destruction are planted the moment they win, because comfort kills Asabiyyah. Walls replace brothers, mercenaries replace cousins, and that raw, terrifying power, it begins to fade. So Ibn Khaldun leaves us with this reality. The superpower of the tribe is real. It is unstoppable, but it is also self-destructive. It builds the empire, sure, but it cannot survive the empire it builds. Now, look at the ruler. He is comfortable, he is settled, but he is also paranoid. Ibn Khaldun points out a brutal irony here. As the dynasty cements its power, the ruler starts to fear his own blood. The very tribesmen who put him on the throne, the ones with the shared Asabiyyah, the shared struggle, they are now threats. They remember when he was just one of us. They feel entitled to a share of the glory. So what does the ruler do? He pushes them away. He curbs their power. But he still needs protection. He still needs a sword. so he buys one. Ibn Khaldun argues this is the moment the soul of the empire begins to rot. The ruler turns to clients and mercenaries, hired guns, men with no connection to the soil, no memory of the founding struggle, and absolutely no loyalty beyond the coin in their purse. This is a fundamental shift. Ibn Khaldun warns that you have moved from a defense based on blood and belief to a defense based on payroll. But here is the trap. The bill always comes due. Ibn Khaldun explains the math of this suicide. Mercenaries are expensive. As the ruler hires more of them to secure his power, he burns through the treasury, so he raises taxes. He squeezes the farmers, the merchants, the producers. The economy begins to suffocate under the weight of the military budget. And when the money runs out, the sword turns in the hand. The ruler finds himself a hostage in his own palace. He is no longer the master, he is the paymaster, and if he misses a payment, the protectors become the predators. Ibn Khaldun describes this with chilling clarity. The dynasty becomes a victim of its own defenders. The mercenaries realize they have the weapons, and the soft, tax-burdened citizens have nothing. It is a pathetic end. The empire doesn't fall to a great external enemy at first. It rots from the inside, because it tried to outsource its own survival. Ibn Khaldun tells us plainly, you cannot buy Asabiyyah. You cannot write a check for loyalty. Once you pay someone else to bleed for you, you have already lost. Ibn Khaldun looks at the rise of civilizations, and he doesn't start with gold or monuments. He starts with the Bedouins, the nomads, the people living on the razor's edge of survival. He argues that this harshness isn't a curse, it's a forge. When you read the Muqaddimah, you realize he isn't romanticizing poverty, he's analyzing necessity. He points out that out there, in the Badlands, there is no government to call. There are no walls to hide behind, no police, no standing army to fight your battles. So what happens? You become the wall, you become the army. Ibn Khaldun observes that this terrifying exposure forces men to rely entirely on two things, their own fortitude and their bloodline. He calls this Asabiyyah, group feeling, social cohesion. But those words are too clinical, too soft. And this is where the warning begins. Because these men look at the sedentary cities, the empires fat with grain and silk, and they don't see power, they see prey. Ibn Khaldun points out a brutal truth here. The civilized man, the city dweller, has outsourced his defense. He pays taxes so someone else will carry the sword. He sleeps soundly behind stone walls, secure in the knowledge that the state is watching. But the historian warns that this security is a poison. He argues that by relying on laws and the government for protection, the soul of the city dweller becomes soft. It loses its edge. The whips of authority replace the internal discipline of the clan. We become domesticated, like sheep relying on the shepherd to scare off the wolves. And the wolves are coming. The Bedouins, driven by that ferocious Asabiyyah, eventually descend on the city. And the city falls. It always falls. The tough conquer the soft. The hungry eat the full. It's simple physics. But here's the tragedy. Ibn Khaldun sees the trap snap shut the moment the victory is won. Because once those strong men take the throne, they move into the palace. They put down the rough wool and pick up the silk. They stop sleeping in the cold. They taste the good wine and the soft beds. Ibn Khaldun warns that the very thing they conquered, the luxury, the ease, the civilization, starts to work on them. The strong men create the good times, and those good times begin to rot the very strength that built them. It's a cycle, a grinder. He tells us that the qualities required to build an empire are the exact opposite of the qualities fostered by an empire. You build it with grit. You lose it with comfort. The desert creates the king, but the city kills the dynasty. You think modern economists figured this out? You think some guy on a napkin in the 1970s discovered the relationship between tax rates and revenue? No. Ibn Khaldun saw it coming 600 years earlier, and he wasn't talking about policy adjustments. He was talking about survival. He maps it out in the Muqaddimah, and it's terrifyingly simple. He argues that at the beginning of a dynasty, taxation yields a large revenue from small assessments, but at the end of the dynasty, you get a small revenue from large assessments. Let that sink in. When the ruler first takes power, he's still got that desert grit. He's tough, simple. He doesn't need golden spoons or silk drapes. He relies on group solidarity, not mercenaries. So Khaldun points out the tax burdens are light, just the religious dues, maybe a little extra. That's it. And because the burden is low, people have energy. They want to work. They want to build. They know that if they bust their backs in the field or the market, they get to keep the fruit of that labor. The incentive is there. Cultural activity explodes. The economy grows. And because the economy is massive, even a small tax rate brings in a mountain of gold for the ruler. Everyone wins. It's the golden hour. But it doesn't last. It never lasts. Khaldun warns that the ruler changes. He gets comfortable. He stops being a leader of men and starts being a king. He needs guards, he needs palaces, he needs to pay off rivals and impress diplomats. He needs luxury, and luxury is expensive. So the expenses go up. The ruler looks at the books and sees he needs more cash. What does he do? He raises the tax rate, just a little at first. Khaldun explains that the people accept it. They're used to the good times. They figure it's just a temporary hike. But the ruler's appetite for luxury has no bottom. It's a beast that eats and eats. He raises the rates again and again. He creates new customs duties. He taxes the sales. He taxes the gates. Now the math turns against him. He notes that as the tax burden gets heavier, the incentive to work dies. Why would you farm if the sultan takes half the harvest? Why open a shop if the profit margin is wiped out by levies? So people stop. They stop building, they stop farming. Some of them flee the city entirely. The tax base, the actual economy, shrinks.
The ruler panics. He sees his revenue dropping, but instead of cutting his spending, instead of selling the peacocks and firing the harem, he doubles down. He thinks, if I'm getting less money, I need to raise the tax rate even higher. It's a death spiral. Khaldun describes this phase with brutal clarity. The ruler turns into a tyrant. He starts confiscating property outright. He invents crimes just to seize assets. He ruins the very people who feed him. And the result? The city falls into ruin. The civilization disintegrates. The soldiers, unpaid and angry, turn on the dynasty. The outlying tribes smell weakness and close in. It's not just an economic theory for him. It's a biological life cycle. The dynasty taxes itself to death. It eats its own muscle to feed a hunger that can never be satisfied. Khaldun tells us this isn't an accident. It's inevitable. It is the nature of royal authority to demand more, and it is the nature of excessive taxation to destroy the very thing it feeds on. The dynasty commits suicide, one tax hike at a time. Here is the trap, the thing we all chase, the thing we think is the finish line: comfort. Ibn Khaldun looks at the trajectory of every great power, every dynasty that ever rose from the dust, and he sees the same fatal paradox. Success doesn't preserve an empire. Success kills it. He points out that when a group first conquers a city,
usually a rugged, hardened tribe from the fringes. They are hungry. They have Asabiyyah, deep, unbreakable group solidarity. They watch each other's backs because they have to. The desert doesn't forgive. The mountains don't negotiate. So they are tough, lean, and unified. But then, they win. They take the throne. They enter the city. And they settle. This is where the rot sets in. Ibn Khaldun calls it the transition from Bedouin life to sedentary culture. It sounds nice, doesn't it? Civilization? Refinement? But he warns that this sedentary life is actually a graveyard for the human spirit. It is a slow-acting poison that tastes like honey. It starts small. Better food, softer clothes, a roof that doesn't leak. But Ibn Khaldun argues that human desire has no ceiling. Once the struggle for survival ends, the struggle for status begins. The ruling class stops caring about protecting the tribe and starts caring about distinctiveness. Who has the rarest silk, the biggest palace, the most exotic spices? The focus shifts. It turns inward. And this luxury isn't just a habit. It disrupts the very nature of the people. Ibn Khaldun traces this decay through generations with a precision that hurts to read. The first generation, they remember the struggle. They know the hardship. They enjoy the new luxury, sure, but they keep their swords sharp. They know how they got there. They still have that desert toughness in their bones. Then comes the second generation. They hear the stories of the struggle, but they've never felt the sand in their teeth. They grew up in the palace. They see the power, but they attribute it to the institution, not the muscle that built it. They are softer. They are proud, but their pride is hollow. And the third generation, they are lost. Ibn Khaldun is brutal here. He describes them as being no different from livestock. They are completely dependent. They have forgotten the desert entirely. They've never known hunger. They've never known real fear. And because they've never been afraid, they don't know how to be brave. They assume the comfort is a natural law, something that will just always be there. As the luxury goes up, Asabiyyah goes down. It's a mathematical certainty to him. Why die for your cousin when you can pay a mercenary to fight for you? Why struggle when you can tax the peasantry to fund your lifestyle? Ibn Khaldun explains that this addiction to comfort creates a dependency on the state. In the wild, you defended yourself. In the city, you pay taxes so someone else defends you. You lose your claws. You become domesticated. The people become weak. The government becomes a predator to feed its own expensive habits. And the walls? They might look strong. The monuments might be tall, but there's nobody left with the will to defend them. Ibn Khaldun tells us that at this stage, the empire is basically a corpse waiting for a gravedigger. Ibn Khaldun spots the exact moment the rot sets in. It isn't when the enemy creates a better sword. It isn't when a drought hits the harvest. It's when the ruler gets comfortable. He points out that in the beginning, the dynasty is lean. It's built on the backs of tough men, desert men, people bound by blood and shared struggle. Asabiyyah. They don't need a payroll department. They don't need tax auditors. They fight because they believe. But then they win, and they settle down. And that is where the trouble starts. He argues that as the empire matures, the ruler separates himself from his people. He stops trusting the tribe that put him in power. They are too dangerous, too independent. So he hires mercenaries. He builds a palace. He puts up a gate. And to manage all of this, he creates a machine. Bureaucracy. He warns us that this machine is hungry. It always needs to be fed. At first, the taxes are low. Ibn Khaldun is very clear about this. The strongest empires have the lowest taxes in the beginning. People work hard, they keep what they earn, and the treasury fills up because the economy is booming. It makes sense. But the machine grows. The ruler gets used to luxury. He needs more silk, more guards, more monuments to his own ego. And the bureaucrats, they need salaries. So the spending goes up. And here is the brutal truth Ibn Khaldun delivers. The ruler looks at the people and stops seeing allies. He sees a revenue stream. He raises the taxes. He adds customs duties. He invents fees for things that used to be free. He explains that this is the death of innovation. It's a simple calculation. Why should a merchant take a risk? Why should a farmer work the extra acre? Why should an artisan invent a better tool if the state is just going to swoop in and confiscate the profit? So they don't. They stop trying. He describes a psychological shift. The hope drains out of the market. People stop investing. They bury their money or they leave. And when the people stop producing, the tax base shrinks. Now, a smart ruler would back off, but Ibn Khaldun tells us that by this stage, the dynasty is senile. It's desperate. It sees the revenue dropping, and instead of lowering taxes to spur growth, it panics. It taxes the shrinking economy even harder. It hunts down every last coin. And it gets worse. He points out that the government eventually stops being just a regulator and starts becoming a competitor. The ruler enters the market. He uses his power to buy cheap and sell dear. He forces merchants out of business. This is the end of the line. The economy is suffocated by the very hand that is supposed to protect it. And the people? They change too. He observes that they lose their toughness. They become dependent on the system. They wait for a handout. They become soft, reliant on the government for their livelihood, terrified of the tax collector, stripped of their dignity. The empire might still look terrifying from the outside. The walls are high, the paperwork is stamped, the soldiers are paid, for thou. But Ibn Khaldun warns that it is already dead. It has hollowed itself out from the inside. The innovation is gone, the solidarity is gone, and all that is left is a bloated, expensive shell waiting to collapse under its own weight. It starts with the money. It always comes back to the money. But Ibn Khaldun doesn't look at it like a modern economist. He looks at it like a pathologist examining a dying body. He points out that as the empire settles into luxury, the costs go up. They skyrocket. The ruler needs more silk, more palaces, more guards to protect the silk and the palaces. And where does that money come from? It comes from the people. Khaldun warns that this is the tipping point. The ruler starts to view the subjects not as a flock to be shepherded, but as a resource to be mined. He needs cash to fuel his lifestyle, so he squeezes. Taxes go up, customs duties rise. He invents new ways to bleed the stone dry. But it's worse than just high taxes. Ibn Khaldun argues that the real cancer here is the loss of justice, and he's very specific about what that means. It isn't just about courts or judges making fair rulings. It's about the security of property. It's about the right to keep what you earn. When the ruler starts seizing property, whether it's through forced sales, unjust confiscation, or creating state monopolies that crush the little guy, he breaks the fundamental contract. Khaldun writes that injustice ruins civilization. It's a brutal, simple equation. He explains it like this. People work for profit. They work to build something for themselves, for their families. But when they see that the fruit of their labor is just going to be snatched away by a hungry, desperate state, they stop working. Why bother? The incentive dies. The hope dies. And when the incentive dies, the markets shrink. The tax base collapses. So what does the ruler do? He gets more desperate. He seizes more. He starts competing with his own subjects, entering the markets, manipulating prices. Ibn Khaldun warns explicitly against this. He says that when the ruler becomes a merchant, the economy is doomed. The ruler has all the power, so no one can compete. The market breaks. It's a death spiral. Ibn Khaldun observes that at this stage, the government becomes the enemy of the people. The Asabiyyah, that social glue, that shared purpose, is completely gone. Now it's just the palace versus the street. The ruler creates a wall of soldiers between him and the populace, mercenaries. Because he can't trust his own kin anymore, he pays strangers to protect him from the people he's supposed to serve. And this is where the tone of the Muqaddimah gets dark. He describes a state that is technically alive, but spiritually dead. The buildings are still there, the banners are flying, but the soul is gone. Justice, Khaldun insists, is the balance of the world. It's the only thing keeping the chaos at bay. When the ruler trades justice for luxury, he isn't just being greedy, he's dismantling the foundation of his own throne. He points out that taxes on property kill the spirit of enterprise. The economy stagnates. The cities empty out because people flee to places where they won't be robbed by their leaders. And the ruler? He's usually the last to know. He's surrounded by yes-men, isolated in his splendor, thinking the party will last forever. But Khaldun tells us it can't. The decline is structural. It's baked into the choices they made. This corruption, it's not an accident. Ibn Khaldun views it as the natural old age of the dynasty. Just like a human body gets frail and loses its coordination, the state loses its ability to enforce justice. It becomes senile. It becomes a predator. And a predatory state cannot survive. So the cracks form. The outer provinces break away, the treasury empties, the soldiers stop getting paid. And everyone just waits. They wait for the next strong group, the ones with fresh Asabiyyah, to come over the hill and kick the door down. Because, as Ibn Khaldun reminds us, injustice doesn't just hurt the economy, it invites the conqueror. We like to think we're going somewhere, upward, forward. We look at our skyscrapers and our stock markets, and we tell ourselves that history is a straight line, an arrow pointing towards some infinite, perfect future. But Ibn Khaldun, he looks at that arrow and he breaks it over his knee. He warns us that history doesn't move forward. It spins. It's a wheel, and that wheel crushes everything eventually. Ibn Khaldun argues that civilizations aren't static structures. They are living things, organisms. And like every living thing, like you, like me, they have a lifespan. They are born, they grow strong, they get comfortable, they rot, and then they die. He's brutally specific about this. He doesn't deal in vague philosophies. He gives us a timeline, 120 years. That's it. That is the natural lifespan of a great power. 3 generations, maybe 4 if you're lucky. And he breaks it down. He dissects the anatomy of this decline. It starts with the first generation, the builders. These are the people of the desert, or the mountains, or the fringes. He calls this Badawa, primitive life. It's harsh, it's unforgiving. But that hardness creates something powerful. It creates Asabiyyah, group solidarity, social cohesion. He points out that these people rely on each other to survive. They are tough, brave, and hungry. They sweep in and they conquer because they have nothing to lose and everything to gain. They take the city, they become the kings. But then comes the second generation. This is where the turn happens. Ibn Khaldun notes that this generation moves from the tent to the palace. They move from privation to plenty. Now they still remember the struggle. They saw their fathers fight. They respect the hardness, but they don't live it. They start to get used to the silk sheets and the full bellies. The edge starts to dull, just a little, but the authority is still there. Then the third generation arrives, and this is where Ibn Khaldun's warning gets loud. These are the imitators. They never saw the desert. They never felt the hunger. They were born into power. They think authority is a birthright, not something you fight for. He argues that to them, the state isn't a project to be built, it's a cow to be milked. They focus on luxury, on art, on comfort. They hire mercenaries to do their fighting because they've forgotten how to hold a sword. The Asabiyyah, that glue that held the empire together, dissolves. It's replaced by selfishness, by comfort. And finally, the fourth generation, the destroyers. Ibn Khaldun describes them with absolute disdain. They are completely estranged from their origins. They don't just enjoy luxury, they are enslaved by it. They squander the treasury, they disrespect the people. They think the respect their ancestors earned belongs to them personally, but it doesn't. The people hate them, the soldiers don't fear them, and the wolves are circling at the borders again. A new group with a new Asabiyyah is waiting in the wings to tear them down. He tells us this isn't a mistake. It's not bad luck. It is gravity. He points out that the very things that make an empire great, the wealth, the stability, the urbanization, are the exact things that poison it. Success breeds the comfort that kills you. You cannot have the empire without the luxury, and you cannot have the luxury without the decay. It is a trap. So when we look at our own world, at our own stability, Ibn Khaldun isn't impressed. He's looking at his watch. He's asking which generation we are. Are we the builders, or are we the ones just waiting for the end? So, here is the question everyone asks, the billion-dollar question. Can we cheat? We live in an age of life hackers, tech bros trying to reverse aging, economists trying to print their way out of debt. We think every system has a back door. If we just tweak the laws, if we just find the right policy, surely we can stop the rot. Ibn Khaldun looks at this arrogance and he shakes his head. He doesn't see the state as a machine you can repair. He sees it as a living organism, and organisms have a lifespan. He argues that a dynasty has a natural life, just like a human being. 120 years, give or take. 3 generations of 40 years each. You can take vitamins, you can exercise, you can delay the end, but you cannot stop the aging process. He warns that when a civilization enters its senility, his word, not mine, it tries to substitute money for the social glue it lost. The Asabiyyah is gone. The tribe doesn't trust each other anymore, so the ruler tries to buy loyalty. He builds massive walls, he hires mercenaries, he creates a bloated bureaucracy to watch the people because he no longer trusts them. Ibn Khaldun points out that these aren't signs of strength. They are the death rattle. They are the immune system attacking the body. You think you can hack the economy? Ibn Khaldun saw that too. He describes a trap that every dying empire falls into. It goes like this. In the beginning, taxes are low, but revenue is high. Why? Because people are keeping their money, businesses are growing, everyone is optimistic. But then, the ruler gets used to luxury. The bureaucracy expands, the state needs more cash to pay for the armies and the monuments, so they raise taxes. And here is the punchline. He argues that in the end, taxes are high, but revenue is low. You squeeze the population, and they stop producing. They lose hope. The incentives die. The economy contracts. It is a mathematical inevitability. So the state gets desperate. It starts confiscating property. It manipulates the currency. It competes with its own citizens in trade. This is where Ibn Khaldun gets dark. He warns that the only thing that actually keeps a civilization alive is justice. Not social justice in the modern sense, but basic, predictable fairness. If a man works, he keeps his earnings. If a man commits a crime, he is punished, regardless of his rank. When the state becomes the thief, when the law becomes a weapon for the elite to extract wealth from the masses, the game is over. He argues that injustice is not just a moral failing, it is the destroyer of civilization. It physically ruins the land. People leave, farms go barren. The market of civilization collapses because the trust is gone. Can you hack this? Can you pass a reform bill to fix a rotting soul? Ibn Khaldun says no. You can apply a palliative, you can make the patient comfortable, you can pretend for a few more years. But once the Asabiyyah is dead, once the luxury has set in, the generation that built the empire is gone. The generation that remains is too soft to save it. Biology always wins.